right, that's our intro. Put that together a while back. So this is Scott Reed on our second episode of Flock Talk, the podcast. I'm joined by Drew Davis, former Oregon wide receiver, and we're just going to kind of talk some ball tonight, talk a little bit about Michigan State, the wrap up on that, and then move forward to the big game that everybody's been looking forward to for probably the moment the schedule was announced last spring, right?
Definitely. It's been a long time coming.
It has. So what's your, I mean, we talked a little bit, but what's your takeaways on kind of the wrap up for Michigan State? What you saw, what you liked, what you think could be improved on, things like that.
Honestly, I think what we've talked about the last couple weeks, just the O-line being able to protect Dylan, give him a good pocket to throw to. They've been very good at running the ball. And then defense has just been playing stellar. They've been playing lights out. Michigan State wasn't too much of a great offense to go against. Aiden Childs is a turnover machine and not in the best way. But the defense did what they had to do. They made some turnovers. They got some sacks. They got some pressures. They made them look very pedestrian. And what I really liked from the offense, because I'm an offensive guy, I liked how they took some shots down the field. That's something that they hadn't really done, where they just sent some 2 or 3 man routes out, had some 7 or 8 man protection, and they did that. They didn't connect on them a lot, but it lets you know that the offense is starting to open up a little bit more, and that Dylan Gabriel starting to get a little bit more confident and letting it go as well.
And I think the other thing that does, it forces teams to be honest about what they're doing defensively. If you're going to take shots down the field, you can't stack the box every time because you're going to get beat on some of those shots if you do that. So that helps create that space for the running game, especially the game Jordan James had. The thing I liked, and I don't know if you remember the play, there was a play where there was offsetting penalties. Oregon had an illegal man downfield. There was a holding on the defense at the same time. But if you watch that pocket, and I talked about earlier tonight on a different podcast, that pocket had, it was the perfect pocket. One of those when you can't see it quite as well on TV, but when you're sitting in the press box and you look down and you see that pocket in that perfect like U shape, and Dylan Gabriel sitting there going through what looked like about 128 progressions before he finally tried to make a throw. It was just one of those things where the difference between that moment and what we saw against Idaho and Boise State in the first half, I think really showed a lot of progression for kind of the communication. There was another play that someone reminded me about where Pancho Lalulu read a blitzing corner from the edge, and he trusted his guards enough to go ahead and pull out to take that blitzer and stop a sack that was almost surely going to happen because he was the only one that really was able to get out there and make that play. One, it showed his athleticism to be able to make that play, and two, just that communication along the line and that trust that's there now that I don't think was there at the very beginning of the year.
Yeah, it's something that comes with time, honestly. But like you said, that is a real athletic play for a guard to make. That's some real trust to have that somebody else is going to be able to get out there and stop that blitzer. And it just speaks to the level of the level of play the offensive line has risen to over the last couple weeks. And it's just one of those things with continuity. We talked about there were some people hurt, there were some people gone. They're figuring out things with guys that have gone to the NFL, which is normal, and sometimes you can only get that through game experience, and that's okay.
That is, they call them gamers for a reason, and Allen Iverson has his funny quip about practice, but it's true that there's only so much you can do in practice because no matter how much you want to say that you're going to give, those are still your teammates, and you still have a different approach in a practice versus when you get out there on the field. And it matters now. Yeah, it matters in practice, but there's no score kept. I
Yep.
know some people say they do. They don't keep score. Nobody looks at the record of practice and says, "Oh, that team was 0 and 12 in practice, so they don't count." It's those games don't count, and so um, I was that way when I played. I played at a smaller school, and I was that way. I'd go out there and practice was a kind of this thing. It was a mechanical process where you're trying to understand one, the install of the game plan, two, the what you're expecting from the defense. But when you get out there on the field, a lot of that stuff, all of a sudden everything speeds up, but it matters more. And so it takes time to kind of get that feel. So, and I've been impressed so far with the work that I think I've seen. Dylan Gabriel, he made a couple of mistakes though. Those are the things that he's got to clean up really quick. The second interception against Michigan State was the one I want to call inexcusable because he should have understood the leverage of the defensive back and just not thrown that ball there. That should have been a throwaway. I don't think there was any way he was going to fit that there. The
Mhm.
DB had that inside leverage. There was no way he was beating that guy to the ball, and it was a bad throw. What'd you see on that?
I agree with you. If he was going to throw it, he should have thrown it a lot earlier. There's two things you don't do with long throws or throws outside the numbers, and that's throw them late or throw them inside where the DB, where you've already left the DB. And so just knowing that they've run that route a lot with Tez, just a little quick speed out or a little rub route and things like that. And it's been, I think, for the most part this year, when they've done it, it's been wide open or he's had two or three steps on the guy. That was probably the closest the defender's been all year. But that also comes with just like, oh, it'll be there. That thing you do in practice where you just like you said, we'll get in the game. Don't worry, we got it. It was one of those, but you can't throw those late. And then also you're going against a different caliber of player. I know Michigan State's offense isn't good, but they have some guys on their defense that are really athletic and can really run. And so those plays that you were making against Idaho State, where the guy is two, three steps behind. Versus Michigan State and Ohio State and other schools like that, it's a bang bang play.
Absolutely, I agree. So we have the big one coming up. I did some takes on this, but one of the things I kind of Oregon fans a lot are talking about the 2021 game in that Oregon was undervalued going into that game. They went into the horseshoe. They beat an Ohio State team that was highly ranked, highly favored with probably better offensive players than what they have now. I don't think
Mhm.
anybody would argue that Will Howard is better than C.J. Stroud was, right? And I think the receivers they had, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., they had some really good talent there. The problem is that defense was led by Kerry Combs, who is now the DB coach at Cincinnati, and he's that for a reason. And I think that defense was way more disorganized, discombobulated, and just not ready as much as a Jim Knowles defense is going to be this weekend. So I don't think they compare. What do you see when you kind of look at that matchup?
I say the same thing. You look at it and like you said, they were probably a better offense. But there's just so many weapons. And I wrote a little bit about that to you today. You look at both running backs, they both have 3,000 career rushing yards, they both have 36 career touchdowns each against each other. And then I think the liability is Will Howard. Like you said, it's probably if you look around offensively, if you look outside, you look at the running backs, you look at the interior of the line, you're probably like, all right, everywhere else is pretty well put, except that guy that's playing quarterback hasn't really had anybody test him. And I think that's a tough thing when you get into looking at schedules and who played who and what was the score. Ohio State hadn't played anybody up until they played Iowa last week. And you look at that and you would like to be like, okay, well, this team beat this team by 30 something, and we beat them by this, and they beat them by this. But with this, they're playing what the Kent States or the Ohio's and stuff like that. So it's tough to compare it. But you look at it defensively, and like I watched them for a couple games this year, and anytime you're leading the nation in points per game at 6.8, it's an impressive thing to do. They're pretty much top 10 or top 15 in all their defensive categories, and they have athletes over there. So Caleb Downs is a baller, and you look at that, and he's able to come down in the box and make plays. So the talent's going to match up very nicely, and I think it's going to be one of those things that's a chess match. And I can see both offensive coaches trying to feel each other out and trying to say, all right, what are they going to come out in? How are they going to line up? And I could also see them being a little bland from their last games as far as leading up to this game, not wanting to show too much.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I saw, and people asked, what do you do when you have these awful teams they played? How do you know how they're going to play in a tight game? So what I did is I went back and looked at how Will Howard did in tight games last year at Kansas State. Now,
Mhm.
granted, Kansas State doesn't have the same talent offensively or defensively, but he was still a quarterback and he was playing tight games. So I looked at his one possession games. They had 5 of them last year at Kansas State, and he went 1-4 and
Mm.
completed, I think, 56% of his passes, threw 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So he was average or a little above average in those tight games. And I think that's the thing that Oregon has to try to push here is they have to try to keep this game close so that they can start getting the pressure on a guy who this season is only completing 31% of his passes when he's facing pressure. So you want to be in those situations where you can say we're going to put pressure on this guy and we're going to bring it and we're going to see if he can hold up in this tight environment on the road in a place that is probably going to be as crazy as anything he's seen. You've played there. I know Ohio State fans are out there saying it's only 60,000 people. It can't be as loud as 100,000. It can't be the same. It's different. It is different. And I don't think, and physics may be physics, but the fans are different. The
Mhm.
way that they act in this game, and when there's an opponent like this, they're just different. And I don't think people know that until a Michigan Lloyd Carr comes there and says, "Ooh, I did not expect this number of people to be this loud," right? And you've been there, you know what it's like to kind of feel that environment. I think the Fright Night game is the one that really stands out that is comparable to this. I think, wouldn't you agree?
I agree. I was trying to look back at games and saying, there's every couple years where somebody's like, "Hey, this is the biggest game in Oregon history," or the most anticipated one. And when I look back at games, I would have to say, yeah, I was like looking at that one, looking at the Stanford from 2010, where College Game Day was there. That was a loud one as well. Um, and what you said, it's those 60,000 people are crazy. They go crazy, and the way when I'm watching TV or when I was playing, the way I would see if the other team was ready was the first couple of possessions to see if they have a false start or how many false starts they have. That
Mhm.
let me know for the rest of the game. They're probably going to have a couple more if they have one or a couple in the first drive, which lets you know that they are. And thinking of that, I know Chip's going to have them ready too.
Yeah, Chip. I mean, Chip's been there too. He knows exactly what it's like. He was there for the Fright Night game. He was there, well, for the other big game a couple of years ago when UCLA came to town, which was a top 10 matchup and a really, you know, big matchup at the time. Just, I think that was because they were trying to the whole salvage the Pac-12 thing. Um, Funny story about the Stanford game. You may not know this. We tailgated that day, and we got there for game day, and I think I was there at 3 in the morning, right?
Oh my
And I'm
gosh.
and we get done with game day, and it's when they still had general admission parking in the parking lot. They don't have that anymore. Now you have to have reserved spaces out in the Autzen parking lot, and they let us stay in our spot from whenever the game day was over all the way through the game. So we had from what 8 a.m. until I think 5 p.m. Well, 4 p.m. before we started heading in, and we cooked from scratch jambalaya right at our tailgate. It was actually probably the best tailgate we've ever done. We had so many people that when you're in this parking lot, it's different because everybody just wanders by.
Yeah.
When you're out in the other sides, in the offsite places like where I do my RV parking, people don't wander as much out there. They just kind of, if they don't know you, they don't come over. But this was such a fun thing. And that Stanford game, it reminds me of that because jambalaya. And we were just experimenting as we were cooking it. We threw some lime, Bud Light lime in there to add a little bit of citrusy flavor to it, and just some different things. It was a really fun day.
That's extremely impressive that you guys are able to just make some jambalaya throughout the day up until the game.
Well, when you've got 9 hours to cook it, you can slow cook it over a grill. You can't quite do that if you've got 2 hours. You got to try to have it ready to go and somehow loosen it up with some water, which never tastes good. So um, I'm looking at this game also thinking the recruiting aspect of this is huge, right? There are almost 3 dozen elite recruits, not a bunch of guys that are maybe not going to get an offer. These are guys that everybody wants that are going to be there. And I wrote for tomorrow in the regular written version of Flock Talk that I think this might be from that perspective, this may be the most important game in Oregon history because we're talking now about getting to that elite level of recruiting where you're competing with Georgia and Alabama for that title of best recruiters. And while we don't always say, hey, 5 stars aren't always it, right? Sometimes 5 stars fail. The reality is in the rivals era, no team has won a national championship with at least one top 10 ranked class.
Ooh.
So whether we don't like this or not, it does take a top ranked class in order to compete for that national championship. And it takes depth. And I think this is where Oregon is just starting to really rise up is that depth perspective from recruiting.
Mm, I would have to agree. It's funny because I would say, as you're talking about it, when the recruits come, you want to show them a great game, you want to win, but you want the atmosphere to be great as well. The atmosphere in Autzen is almost always greater. It's always great to my knowledge. But for these big games and these big matchups, it's on another level. And so when guys come in there and they see that, you produce a win, you're running around, you're seeing shout in the first fourth quarter because you're up and the game is looking like it's going in your favor. Like they see that and they're like, yo, I wanna commit right now. I know where I want to go. I don't want to waste any more time. And just knowing that stat that you told me, nobody's won a national championship without a five-star class. Oregon used to not even be up there, used to not even be in the stratosphere of up there. And we still made do with what we got because we got, quality players and we're able to coach them really well. But it's great to get the five stars and rather than not get them and wish you had them. So I'm glad we're in that boat and that we're the coach landing and all the coaches are doing a great job showing the recruits a great time when they're on campus and they just have to take care of business and play a very good and sound game and come out with the W to seal the deal on some of those guys.
And I think the biggest thing is compete. I don't think, and you probably know this too, how much winning helps because that changes the excitement level of after the game. You go in that locker room and those players are celebrating. I'm sure when you were on a visit and players were celebrating there with you after a win, it was something really exciting for them to see that. But as I talk to some of these kids, they say, we just want to be able to compete and we want to see a really good game. If you don't want to go in there and see Ohio State blow out Oregon 39 to nothing, because then that completely demolishes any momentum. And I don't think we're going to see that tomorrow or Saturday. So I'm not too worried about that. It's it's just that level of elite recruiting that is different. Um, what do you see? Because it's hard to define to people why everybody is gravitating towards Lanning when it comes to recruiting. You may have a different vision than me on that.
I think it's a couple things. I think a lot of it's him. A good amount is him. He's fairly young, and I think a lot of coaching is going that way. But outside of that, you look at everything they're doing. I even look from a distance, and I'm checking out their reels they're putting out that are looking like movie premieres, and their episodes of stuff that they're doing, and you feel like you're kind of there. When you make a movie, of course, you can show somebody a highlight reel or a promo of the shoot and it's going to look great. But you see all this stuff of what they're doing day to day, week to week, what the theme is for that week, and them coming up with the W on the weekend and how they party in the locker room and how they're singing shout in the fourth quarter. So you're seeing all this stuff about Autzen, about Oregon football, and you want to be a part of it. And then you come, and when you come and you see the trainers are great, you see your teammates are great, you see the coach that's recruiting you is awesome, you see the weightlifting coach is awesome. It's all these things that keep stacking on top of each other where in a different place you might be looking at or getting recruited, it might not be the exact same. And so I think it's a culmination of stuff that they're doing where they know that this recruiting, it's not just coaches, it's not just this area, it's not just that area, but they're saying, how can we make the best experience and how can we make you feel like you're here or want to come here even when you're not here? And so I think they're doing a great job at that.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things, and we didn't put the list out to free for people to see, but one of the people, this is going to get seen by everybody because I'm not making this um, premium content. So people are going to see this. One of the recruits that's going to show up is a guy named Jakeem Stewart. He is from Louisiana, um, and he's got Oregon in his Final Four, and he reclassified from 2026 to 2025. So
Mhm.
now he's going to sign in this class, which is huge because he's one of those guys that's a strong side defensive end, but he's going to remind you a lot of a slightly bigger version of Kayvon Thibodeau. He's about 265 pounds, 6'5", 6'6". He's going to be one of those guys that when he reclassified, they made him the number 4, but he's still a top priority. He's got Oregon in his top 4, and I think that's the kind of guy that you build around on defense. He's going to be a lot like Jordan Birch. He's going to be Mateo Uyunglele. Um, Tatum Tuioti is more of a linebacker, but you're going to see that kind of a guy, this strong side defensive end that is really just a big, powerful edge rusher that can also set the tone on running. So he's one of the guys. Guy named Naeem Offord. I don't think he's visiting. He's got a lot of interest in Oregon. Going to be tough. He's from Birmingham. I think he's committed to Iowa State. I think he's going to flip, but I'm not sure that it's going to be to Oregon. We did a fact or fiction with that today, and I think he's probably this is Oregon's best shot to flip him. He's a defensive back, then he's elite, and he's one of those guys. What is he? He's 6'2", so he's one of those corners that's six foot
Mm.
two that can make plays on the ball. And I think that'll be so. This is the weekend. This is the weekend for them to try to make a move on not just 2025, but tons of 2026 prospects. I think over a dozen guys from the 2026 class are going to be here, so it's going to be a big, big weekend.
Mm. And it's funny, I heard about the young recruit you talked about as far as him switching and reclassifying and everything. And I think that's one of the craziest things in a good way that, somebody is that ready that they can reclassify and then hop into college pretty much, most of 16, 17 years old. But to be able to be like, I'm going to come in and make an impact and play as well is even more crazy to me.
It is. I mean, I was lucky to graduate on time, let alone a year early. Patrick Chung was a different story. That kid graduated at 16 years old, and he didn't reclassify. That's just how young he was when he graduated.
Yeah.
When he showed up, but he's going to be one of those guys. I don't know that Oregon gets him, but I think it's one of those guys you take your shot at because
Definitely.
you've got to take your shot at a guy like that, even if you think you're a long shot. I had them as a long shot until he put them in the Final Four. So
Cool.
he's less of a long shot now to me. I think Oregon has a legitimate shot. He's still going to be one of those guys that's tough to get, but when you're 1 of 4, it's a lot better than being 1 of 20, right? And I think those are the kind of guys you build around. Um, and then, of course, Akili Smith Jr. is going to be in town. He's the Oregon commit already. I think Oregon fans probably know who his dad is. His dad played for Oregon in 98 and 99, 97 and 98, and was drafted in 99 to the Bengals. But one of those kids that, I talked to his dad about it and I talked to him about it. We see a kid that at camps, he gets downgraded because he doesn't throw at camps like people watching at camp think he should. But you watch him on tape and he's different on the field. That's that practice versus game. And he's different. He makes throws on the field that you don't see him quite making the same in a camp setting. So I think there's a lot of good players coming into this class, and we'll talk more about that because next week we're going to be joined by our recruiting writer who's from South Carolina, but he's got some family things going on this week. So he's going to join us, and we're going to kind of do this more of we'll talk football, we'll talk recruiting, and we'll kind of go back and forth. Anything you're kind of looking for this weekend? Anything that you're most wanting to see?
Honestly, I really want to see the matchups, how Jabbar Muhammad's going to play. I want to know if he's going to follow a receiver, if he's just going to be on, if he's just going to be on one side of the field, if he's going to switch up with Emeka Buka and Jeremiah Smith. I really want to see that because you want to see top talent, NFL talent, first round talent going against other first round talent in a game that means a lot. I know college is a little bit different. We don't have people just following somebody around the field the whole time like it would be in the NFL. But you can see that Jeremiah Smith is, as I look at him on film, I see Julio Jones, a guy that I played with, who was just big, fast, strong. I've never seen a guy who's a freshman make 3 or 4 one-handed catches in his first 5 or 6 college games, like, and making it look very easy, making it look like he belongs. So I'm really interested in that because I know Muhammad's not been tested much this year. Because if you're smart, you'll stay away from him, just like you stay away from Travis Hunter, or that you should. But when you're going against guys like this, you're going to have some coaches. Coach Chip is going to be like, all right, well, let's play some ball. Let's see who the better player is. Let's draw up some plays and schemes, and let's see who the best player is, and go up and make a play. I believe in my guy, so I'm really interested in that. And honestly, I'm just looking forward to a good game, like you said. I just want both teams to come out ready and knowing that, not to say the winner of this game is gonna, they might see each other later down the road as well. Like, we don't know. So this could just be a a preview for something later down the road as well. Which, after, if it's like that, then get your popcorn ready.
It could. In fact, I discussed it today. I think to me, this reminds me a lot of Washington last year, not because they're winning a bunch of games close like Washington did, but because I think we knew when Oregon lost to Washington last year, we knew that they were going to meet again. I think we knew that. I looked ahead at Ohio State's schedule. The only thing that, because it's such a big league now with 18 teams in the Big Ten, I wasn't sure who all they were going to face and whether Indiana was going to present a problem to the loser of this game because if Indiana found a way to go undefeated, the loser of this game would be out of the Big Ten championship game. However, Indiana plays Ohio State. So if Indiana goes undefeated, that means they beat Ohio State.
Yeah.
And that may create some confusion. But I do think this is a preview of the Big Ten championship game. One of the things that I've noticed is that the Big Ten is top heavy, right? They've got Ohio State and Oregon. Indiana, people aren't sure yet. Illinois and Nebraska are a little bit lower. In Michigan is not where they were a year ago. USC, Washington, these teams are not where I think they thought they were going to be. And so this is a little bit top heavy right now. So I do think this is going to be a rematch that we'll see down the road, which will be interesting to see what happens in this game. If it's close, it could play out a lot like last year did for Oregon. It could play out differently if it's the opposite way. I think it's going to be fun to see those Fly era uniforms once it gets dark at around 6 o'clock, well, 6:30. I think you'll start seeing it get dark. When you start seeing that, it's going to be fun. When they're wearing those things and shout happens after the third quarter, I think
Mhm.
that's going to be this environment that is going to be unlike anything we've seen for a long time. And I think this is going to be something that people who were there will remember. They'll remember. I think people who were there for Fright Night in 2009, the Halloween game, people remember that game. People remember being there. Well, some people probably don't remember being there for various reasons related to being a student in college. But I'm really excited about this. I think what I'm looking forward to the most is I want to see just how good this defensive line is against an elite offensive line. They've
Mhm.
looked good against some teams, but I want to see, can Jordan Burch and Derek Harmon do that against Ohio State, what they did to Michigan State? If they can, they're in really good shape, I think, for this game.
I like that. I like that. I agree. And I don't know if you noticed about me, I love watching the interior play of offensive line and defensive line because that's where it starts. And like you said, if they're able to do what they did against Michigan State to some pretty good offensive linemen and a pretty good scheme, then we know we have something special that can take us deep into the season and the playoff.
All right. So I gave my prediction on the boards. I will put it here. I did not predict Oregon to win. Um, Only because I still got to see a couple of things. I still two elite running backs and two elite wide receivers makes it really difficult to defend. A stat that I did not know that I heard tonight that was eye opening. Oregon is 17 of 21 in the red zone. Only 14 of those are touchdowns. So 66% touchdowns in the red zone. Ohio State is 100% in the red zone, and 20 of the 21 scores were touchdowns. So
Yep.
they've been in the red zone 21 times, scored all 21 times, and 20 of those were touchdowns. That is going to possibly be the stat of the game. How these teams do in the red zone could determine this. Um, we'll go ahead and let you make your score prediction.
It's funny, I switched it around. I had Ohio State winning at first. I listened and read up on a couple more things, and I've switched it. And I said, you know what? I believe Oregon's going to get it done. I said Oregon 33, Ohio State 30. I think, just like you said, red zone is going to be pretty big, but I think time of possession is going to be the biggest. I think you're going to see two offensive teams come out here. Like I said, it's going to be a chess match. They're going to try to fill each other out, but I can really see Will Stein getting in his bag, calling up some plays, some RPO, some run, establishing a run, getting Ferguson out on the edge and getting him wide open, getting 18. I always forget his name, getting him the ball in some special situations. And I feel also Chip will try to do the same on the other side. I think they'll know that, hey, this is a game we're not going to get, upwards of 14 or 15 possessions just because how the other team can play. And so I
Right.
think it's going to be a lot more strategic with mix of run pass. Look for Oregon to throw a trick play in there once or twice, like they usually love to do. But I think it's going to be one of those grinded out games where it's going to be try to impose our will in a lot of different ways. And like you said, just Dylan Gabriel just needs to take care of the ball once they get down to the red zone. It was really uncharacteristic of him to see that the last game. But I think he knows how to show up in big games like this. He was in the won the Red River rivalry a couple years ago by taking that team all the way down the field in those last couple seconds, which is one of the most amazing games I've been able to see where I didn't think that team was going to win. And so he shows up in big games. So I can't wait to see how he shows up this weekend.
Neither can I. One thing I'll say, I'll give Oregon fans hope. I also picked Oregon to lose at Ohio State in 2021. I know different teams, but hey, maybe the reverse jinx will work, right? I pick against them and they win. That's what we're going for.
Smart.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and, every once in a while. And by the way, it's Kenyon Sadiq is number 18.
Got you.
He's from the state of Idaho. He's actually a really good kid. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just go ahead and sign off for the week, and we will talk again next week. Hopefully, we'll be joined by Lee, and we'll get a little bit more recruiting info from him. I talk to recruits, but he talks to more than I do because I do have a day job that doesn't allow me to just sit there and call recruits all day. Well, they might, except I'd lose the job. So, got to pay the bill somehow. Anyway, it was great talking to you tonight, Drew. We'll get together next week, and we'll do this again.
Sounds good. Appreciate you, Scott. Enjoy the game. Go Ducks.
Awesome. I'll see you soon.
There you go.